Hey geometry team, we're ready for Unit 4 Day 2, which I forgot to change the number on here, but you know what? It's still Day 2, so you just got to trust it. It'll be right in the file once I fix that, but here in the video it's going to be wrong. My apologies. So let's go ahead and talk about what we've got today. We're going to focus just on the triangles a little bit. So we've got ourselves our isosceles triangle. So remind yourself, isosceles triangles are the triangles that have two sides congruent only. Get it? Just two. And so they have some parts. The first part is your vertex angle, okay? Your vertex angle is always the angle between the congruent sides. That should have two E's. Okay? So here we have this side congruent and this side congruent. That makes this angle right here has to be the vertex angle. These guys that are kind of hanging off the ends down here at the feet, that's not them. They're not the vertex angle, just this one up here. Okay? The next guy we have are these congruent sides are called the legs. And when it's standing up like this, they kind of look like legs, the way you would be standing. This would be your body up here, and these would be your little feet if you had the feet. So the congruent sides are always called your legs. Even if they're laying down on its side, these are still always going to be your legs. These angles now that are down here at your feet are going to be your base angles, and they're always congruent because in an isosceles triangle, whenever you have the congruent sides, these base angles that are opposite them must also be congruent. So even if I don't tell you how big these are or anything, if these sides are congruent, this side down here and this angle down here, these two angles have to be the same size no matter what, every time. And then lastly, this little piece here on the bottom, it gets its own little name too. Since it's on the bottom when we're standing the triangle up, that's just going to be called your base because that's where it's standing on. So you've got your legs, you've got the base it's standing on, your base angles there, and your vertex angle up there at the top. Okay? Now, for an isosceles triangle, if I were to give you some numbers, you can use that information now to say, okay, if this is 80 degrees, how big, and this is 20, how big should X be? And you go, okay, well, I know that these two sides are congruent because they're marked congruent. It's an isosceles triangle. So if this one's 20, X had better be 20. Again, because the legs of the isosceles triangle are congruent. Now here, I want to know how big Y is. This one's going to take a little more work, but you go, okay, I know that the vertex angle here is going to be 80 degrees. And so if I think, well, how many degrees are in the triangle is 180. So if I take away that 80, I end up with 100 degrees left to share with these two angles. And since we know they're congruent, they're going to share that 100 degrees evenly. And so each one of them is going to be half of the 100. So each one of them is going to be 50 degrees. And I forgot to put, there it is. I put them backwards. But since they're equal to each other, they both had to be 50 degrees. So there's a little more algebra involved in that, but it still used the concept that these base angles opposite the congruent sides are always congruent. Another one here. I know that LM, that's the length of this side, is 20. And so if I want to find X, I go, oh, look, it's an isosceles triangle with congruent sides. This guy here, X, had better be 20 because the two legs of the triangle are going to be congruent. Down here at the bottom, I want to know the measure of Y. Well, up here, I know that angle L is 50. And so when I use the idea, my triangle sum theorem that I had last time, I have 180 degrees. If I take away that 50, it gives me 130 degrees to share for both of these two. And since they are the base angles opposite the congruent sides, I know they're congruent. So they each get to be half of that 130, and they end up both being 65 degrees because of all this stuff I just told you. All right? And so we're always just using those properties of the isosceles triangle to answer the questions. Now we have an equilateral triangle. Remember, equilateral means equal sides, so, ta-da, all three sides are going to be congruent. We also mentioned that all three angles are going to be congruent. It's equiangular. All right. Well, if they're equal angles and the whole triangle is 180 degrees, I should be able to divide that up evenly among those three angles. And when I do, I find out that these angles are always 60 degrees in an equilateral triangle, every time, no matter what. You can just memorize that and not have to do the work for the rest of your life. Just know that in an equilateral triangle, since the angles are the same size, all these angles will always be 60 degrees. Okay, oops, let's erase U2. So we get this problem, got an equilateral triangle here, so I know that 2x plus 10 should equal 30. So if I put those equal to each other, I can algebra out that 2x should equal 20, and so x should be 10 right here. Doing all that math that went along with it, because they were equal. Now down here, if I want to find y, I remember, oh, it's equilateral. All these angles have to be 60. And so when I divide by 2, y has to equal 30. Let's see. Oh, good. I put the right answer. I'm always nervous when I do these on video in case I type something wrong into my slides. Now this last guy, I'm still wanting to find x. I know I have an equilateral triangle. So again, the two sides need to be congruent. So I can make them be equal to each other and then figure out what x is. So if I subtract that 2x, I'll have 3x over here. If I add that 5, I have 15 here. So 3x's will be 15. Divide out the 3, and x comes out to be 5. Because the two sides were congruent, and then we can use algebra to find what that number was. Down here, I'm trying to find y from this angle. Well, it's equilateral. I know it should be 60. And so when I subtract out the 10, 5y equals 50, and so y will come out to be 10. Come on, buddy. You can do it. There it is. Okay. And so for your assignment, you're going to be using these concepts with a bunch of different triangles to figure out some measures. Remember, the sides are congruent, the angles are congruent, and you can use those to your advantage. Thank you very much. Have a great day.